Good morning. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyah b'dvaro. Okay, so chapter 2. There's a story about a great scholar, a Talmid Chacham, a great sage, a great Chassid. His name was Rabbi Gershon Ber, and he was a student of the third Chabad Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, Rebbe Nachum Mendel. This is about 180 years ago. And he was very popular, especially among the younger community. They sought his wisdom, his counsel, his advice for many things. And they once asked him a question. They said, when we talk about spiritual bodies of thought in Jewish tradition, we talk about three kinds generally. There's kabbalah, mysticism. There's chakira, philosophy. And then there's CHASSIDUT. And their question was, what distinguishes these three, and particularly what is the uniqueness or the virtue of CHASSIDUT? And he explained as follows. Kabbalah explains mystical concepts. Kabbalah describes the spiritual heavenly roadmap. It talks about the Sfirot, the divine emanations, upper spiritual worlds, angels, various divine attributes, ways that God flows his energy, creative forces into the world. So Kabbalah paints for you a heavenly roadmap. Chakira, philosophy, deals with the abstract. It asks the big questions and talks about the big ideas where God becomes the absolute unknown, where the transcendental God that is completely beyond any realm of our understanding and our grasp, and how it's impossible to understand, to know, and therefore to deeply connect with God in that kind of way. And Chassidut does the opposite. Chassidut explains you can know God and you can be God, or say that a little safer, you can become one with God. Right? Chakira tells us, philosophy tells us, you cannot know God because only to know God is to be God. So Chassidut responds and says, well, become one with God, and then you will know God. In other words, Chassidut is a very profound application of the most loftiest ideas and concepts, but in a way that you can truly internalize, personalize, grasp intellectually and emotionally, and thus you have a very deep connection with the source of all things. And that is a good segue into today's conversation. We're going to be studying chapter 2 and chapter 3. So chapter 2 begins as follows. If you recall in last study session, we explored many kinds of virtues that Hasidic teachings have. We said that Chassidut has the power to awaken, spiritually awaken a person or a nation from a slumber. Chassidut has the power to transform your characteristics, your emotional self, personal development, away from just being selfish or natural self into becoming something a little more holy and conscientious about. It has the power to level the playing field, the great equalizer, allowing everybody, even the unlearned, to discover their soul and their unique connection with Hashem, and the many other virtues that we spoke about. So here the Rebbe says, all of these things, all of these explanations describe what Chassidut does. But the question is, what is it exactly? Right? Think about it like this. Imagine you're seeing a child eating something and you say, what is it? And the child says, well, it's soft. Yeah, but what is it? And it's cold. But what is it? It's sweet. It's smooth. And what is it? Oh, it's a soft serve vanilla ice cream. Oh, so just tell me what it is. So sometimes when you can know the symptoms or the consequences, the results of what something does, but now the question is, what is it? And this chapter is exploring what is it that therefore leads to all of these virtues in life. And here the Rebbe describes as follows, and it's kind of a very Kabbalistic formula, so bear with me, and then we'll try to break it down and really understand it. He quotes from previous Rebbe Shalom Dov Ber of Lubavitch, the Rebbe Rashab, who says as follows: Chassidut is the manifestation of a or chadash, a new light from the innermost level of Keter. Keter means a crown. It's a spiritual level. And even higher still, it's from the innermost light of Atik, which is the deepest level of Keter, known as ancient days, primordial worlds. It's the level of Ein Sof. It's the level of the endless, infinite light of Hashem, which is found in the level of Radla. Radla stands for Reshit de Lo Ityada, the beginning, the head of all things, which is unknown. There's the answer. That is Chassidut. What on earth does that mean? Let's try to break this down. It's very hard to understand God and godly concepts. It's way beyond us. But one of the ways that Chassidut teaches us how we can get an inkling, a grasp of these ideas, is from looking at ourselves and our souls and our lives. Because our souls are created in the image of God, and the way our soul gives us life and animates us is very similar to how God brings life to all the worlds. Let's talk about your life, your soul. What is life? Your soul gives you life. And what is the nature of this life? Describe life. It's a hard thing to describe. You might tell me, well, life is when you're breathing. Life is when you have mental, neurological activity in your brain. Life is when you have awareness. Life is when you can have feelings and emotions in your heart, in your nervous system. Life is when you can taste in your mouth and hear in your ears and smell in your nose and move, and muscular movement and body movement and all the different sensations. Yes, they are all products of life. But they're not describing to me what life actually is. In other words, if somebody did not have a particular sensation, God forbid, they couldn't smell, they couldn't see, they couldn't hear. What if they can't feel? What if they can't move? What if they can't even think? Chas v'shalom, if they're in a kind of vegetative state and there's not really much brain power, neurological activity going on. Are they not alive? Are they less alive than somebody else? Absolutely not. Really important Jewish idea that we believe in, that it doesn't matter what kind of state you're in. If you're alive, you're alive. And we treat every single life equally precious. And we will fight, we will work hard to preserve and restore any kind of life, not just the life of the brilliantly functional, successful person, but the life of anybody. So when I describe the activities of life, I'm describing the way the soul, the essence of life, flows through and is distilled through the various organs and parts of my body. When it flows through my brain, it creates mindful thinking, neurological activity, cognizance. When it flows through my heart and my nervous system, we're talking about emotions, reactions, impulses. When it flows through the various other organs, we're talking about bodily senses. But beyond its flow into the body and the various organs, if you would talk about the soul itself that creates life, there's something essential there. It's hard to pinpoint what it is. We know what it feels like and looks like. It creates warmth in the body. It creates a pulsating heart. But there's an essence called life. And that is, in essence, what we're trying to deal with over here. We know what the many virtues of Chassidut does and the way it animates and inspires and awakens and empowers and gives hope. We know all that. But what is it? So what the Rebbe has said over here is, in its essence, it's like the essence of the soul, meaning it is rooted. It is a light from Hashem that is rooted in the highest of levels, the levels of the Ein Sof, infinite, endless essence of Hashem, called the Keser, called the crown. Think about this metaphor of the crown. You may be familiar with the Sfirot, the 10 Sfirot. Chachma, Bina, Dat, Chesed, Gvur. These are the 10 attributes that describe what we can understand from our own bodies and lives, intellectual and emotional attributes. And it's the way that, just like our soul would flow through our body, God flows through and animates and brings to life all of creation. But beyond where the essence of God, the light of God, is distilled through these levels, what is it in its essence beforehand? It's just infinity. It's endless light. It's the kesser, the crown that sits above the head. It transcends intellect. It transcends emotion. It transcends really any kind of definition or experience or form or flavor. It's just, in the Hebrew, the word is pshitut, which means simplicity. Not simplicity in the kind of negative connotation we would sometimes say something is not sophisticated and something is not mature or not complex. It's very simple. It's simple in the beautiful way, in the pure way. It's so simple and pure and raw and abstract and real. It's the source of everything else. That would be what Chassidut is, the flow of this light. Let's talk about the word light for a moment. Very often you'll hear that when we refer to godliness, we use the metaphor of the luminary and the light that shines from the luminary. In Hebrew, the ma'or and the or. We could look at the sun and we say there's a sun and there's the light that shines, that radiates from the sun, the rays of the sun. That's a metaphor that is widely used in spiritual teachings to describe God and the light or the energy, the manifestations from God. No, godliness is not light. Light is a physical construct. It's a creation. Why are we using the metaphor of light? So if you think about it, what other existence in this world could best describe, could be the closest metaphor to the presence of godliness? So light seems to be the closest one. Light is not really very physical. It's not tangible. Light is something that's always connected to its source. You switch off the luminary and the light is gone. It doesn't have its own identity. It's a reflection of its source. Light is something that radiates, that brings to light and to life. When the light is switched on in a room, it animates, it turns the whole experience around. Imagine eating in the dark or eating in the light, or living in the dark or living in the light. Light can bring warmth also. So there's so many particulars about the details, the specifics of light properties, that it seemed to be, according to the mystics, it was the closest metaphor to refer to God. Sometimes nowadays, and maybe this is more of a modern idea that wasn't known back then, energies is also a very powerful metaphor to think about this radiance, this manifestation of God's presence as it animates and shines forth into all of creation and into the worlds. So, in summary of chapter 2, we have discovered that if you're asking the question what Chassidut does, we know what it does. Many profound things to life and to society. If you're asking what it is in its source, it is this new light shining from the essence of God, the infinite levels of Hashem, the level of Keter, of crown, of Radlah, the level that's unknown, without any form or image or description, pure simplicity. And it's the way that radiates through all of the cosmos and creation. Chapter 3. The Rebbe says, this concept whereby we've discussed, we know what something is, but we're asking, we know what something does, but we're asking what it is. In other words, when you have the essence of something and this gives forth, this is able to generate all of the outcomes and all of the positive aspects. We've described it about Chassidut, but the truth is it applies to Torah in general. Okay? What is Torah? So we mentioned this yesterday. There's many levels of Torah, many genres of Torah. Torah has 4 general categories. Pshat, the simple meaning. Remez, the hint, it's alluding to something. Drush, homiletical allegory. Sod, mysticism, right? There's many parts of Torah. Then we also know that Torah is the source of all perfection and virtues in the world. Okay, let's say that again. Torah is the source for all perfection, goodness, and virtues in the world. Because Torah is the wisdom of God. God made wisdom, not man-made wisdom. In fact, as the Zohar tells us, that when God was creating the world, he used the Torah as a blueprint to create the world. So it's like the roadmap. If He looked through the Torah, and through the lens of the Torah shined the animating creative forces to create the world. So the world is a byproduct of the Torah. And if the Torah is the wisdom and a reflection of God himself, the creator, then the world that's created through the image of, through the lens of Torah, is obviously has all of those perfections and goodness that the Torah has. Of course, once it's distilled and broken down and come down to this level of life in our world, all other kinds of force can creep in as well. But let's just think about how Torah is the source of all virtues and perfection. And let's talk about two general categories, where in our personal lives, we would talk about the virtues of intellect and emotion, right? Because we're governed by mind and of heart, okay? Let's talk about emotion and characteristics. We talk about a moral life, a moral code, ethical behavior. Where do they come from? Who decides what is moral, what is true, what is real, what is ethical? Torah is the truest source for all true, absolute moral and ethical codes. Take, for example, in Mishnah, the Masechet of Pirkei Avot, the book of ethics, ethics of our fathers. And there's so many beautiful teachings there about a moral code, how to live life, what is the correct way to behave and to feel and to interact with others. Okay, so that's the source of perfection, absolute truth and goodness. Now, there are other sources, other bodies, schools of thought that will teach us about morality and ethics. For example, many man-made systems, many anthropologists, therapists, philosophers, many will come up with systems of thought that will describe morals and ethics. Okay? What's the story with them? What's the deal? Are they good or not good? The answer is both, either. They're man-made. All man-made things are a composite of good and not good, like everything in life. Nothing is perfect. Okay, so it may work for you. So you may see a therapist, you may see a mentor, and they may describe to you ideals and teachings and values that they have come up with or read from another man-made work. This is not to dismiss them and say they're not good and not helpful. They may be very helpful, but not to accept that these are truth and perfection. Everything is a composite of good and not good, tov and ra. And the good aspects, meaning that which is true in those systems of thought, actually is rooted in Torah, because Torah is the source of all true goodness and virtue in the world. Which, by the way, is an important idea when we seek help in life and we seek guidance, spiritual or moral and ethical guidance from a professional, from a mentor, from a guide. Always important to try to find that in a Torah source or a person who has connected with the wisdom of Torah, because then you know you're connecting with true goodness. It's not easy to distill all these things from Torah. You need a real professional. Sometimes you can just read Torah and access different Torah books, and I'm not getting a real takeaway that I can apply to my life. So someone needs to help you with that. But if you can get it from a Torah source, you're definitely dealing with something more true and more real than just from another man-made source. So that's an idea where Torah is the truest source for all moral and ethical and characteristic virtues in this world. There's a story that the Rebbe writes over here about his father-in-law, the previous Chabad Rebbe, Rebbe Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the Frierdiker Rebbe. He was once traveling on a train, and he saw next to him there was a group of Jewish people, and they were discussing the virtues and vices of all different kinds of political systems at the time, and which one the Torah, which one Judaism promotes. Okay, so at that time, what were the hot topics? The Tsarist regime, communism, Marxism, socialism, capitalism, right? These are the debates we still have in society today. What is the model that the Torah would promote as a perfect or best model for society? So each one is arguing their case and bringing sources from the Torah. Another Torah advocates for capitalism or for socialism or for Marxism. And then they saw that the Grand Rebbe was sitting there. So they said, let's ask him. I'm sure he would know. And they said, Rebbe, what is the most ideal political system in the eyes of the Torah? So the Frierdiker Rebbe answered, the Torah is the source for all perfect virtues in this world. If you look at any of those political systems, any virtues that they may have, and they each do have virtues, those come from the Torah. And any of their vices and any of their negative aspects which are harmful or not beneficial to society, those don't come from the Torah. In other words, a very interesting point, don't box Torah and Jewish thought into a political man-made system. Okay? Torah is not subject to man's criteria and man's definitions. So we have created these various systems and we're trying to figure out what works and what's the right one. That's not the Torah. The Torah is the source of all goodness. Somehow there's a goodness of benefit to society within each system. And the Torah is the source for that. The Torah is also the source for all perfection of wisdom and intellect. Okay? So there's many profound schools of intellect. We talk about sciences and math and humanities and all the other beautiful bodies of wisdom that people have come up with and still coming up with all the time. But the most virtuous, most perfect source of wisdoms come from the Torah. As the Torah itself says, Torah is the truest of wisdom and understanding in the eyes of all the nations. So, again, you have to be able to discover. And not every student of Torah is discovering the essence of the true Torah wisdom. You need sometimes a real sage and a real coach and a real mashpia, mentor to help you access that. But if you can access that, you're tapping into the truest of ideas about life and about anything. So here again, we know what Torah does. Torah is the perfection of all virtues in wisdom and in intellect and in emotions and in ethical virtues and moral codes. Yes, that's what Torah does. But what is it? Well, Torah essentially is an entity which is one with God, which is a manifestation of the infinite light and radiation of godliness. Torah is God's chachma, God's wisdom, and God and his wisdom are one. There's a very powerful, abstract phrase from Maimonides who says, Hu ha-mada, hu ha-yodea, hu ha-yadua. He is the knowledge, he is the knower, and he is the method through which it is known. Okay? That's a tough one. We have to flesh that one out because in our world, I'm the knower. This thing that I'm getting to know, the subject is the subject, and then there's the method called intellect that I'm acquiring knowledge of this subject. 3 different things, but God is all of them. There's a kind of oneness within the Godhead. That's Torah in its essence. So you could say, Torah has been so good to my life. I've studied it and it's made my life better and more enlightened and wiser and happier, and it's created a better family dynamic, a better social dynamic. True. But you're describing outcomes of Torah, but the essence is oneness with God. So this is a concept about Torah in general, except that more specifically, we will see this and understand this when it comes to the body of thought called CHASSIDUT. Because all other realms of Torah, like, for example, we said the 4 realms, the simple meaning, the pshat, and the remez, and the hint, and the allegory, and the sod, and the mysticism, these are all particular manifestations, like garments being put onto the light. The light is being radiated through a particular lens, like the soul is becoming distilled and manifest through particular organs of the body. So when we access one realm or one genre of Torah or the other, we're accessing the way the infinity of God's light is radiating and shining and being expressed through a particular form, garment, flavor. When we experience Chassidut, we are dealing with something that will feel and be much more abstract or much more true or much more essential. It's a body of thought that will put us in touch with that which feels quintessential. as if we're getting to the source of all things, the essence of all things. And once we can tap into that, everything else flows from there with amazing beauty and virtue. So, and this is the conclusion of chapter 3. You know, in so many realms today, when it comes to medicine and when it comes to life behavior and therapy and all kinds of work we're trying to do in ourselves and in others, we talk about this idea whether we're dealing with symptoms or dealing with the core. Let's talk about going to a doctor, and a doctor could say, well, I see this particular symptom and that particular symptom, and this is going on and that's going on, and I can treat this and treat that. And then there's this kind of holistic approach where, doctor, let's forget about this, that, or the other. Let's go deeper. What's really going on inside of me that is affecting and causing all of this? So this is the spiritual conversation that this discourse is addressing, where I'm seeing, we're knowing about this virtue and that important idea, etc. But we're trying to take a step back or above or deeper and saying, what is the essence? What is the essence of myself? What is the essence of my identity and my life? What is the essence of all things? What is the essence of Torah? What is the essence of God? And if we can appreciate that and connect with that, then everything else can and will fall into place. And this will come further to light in future chapters. I hope you'll join us tomorrow morning. For now, wishing you an amazing day. God bless you.